And thank you everyone for having me here today to talk about cybersecurity, building our defense layers. So just in the presentation, sit back, relax. We'll take you through the process of building defense layers for cybersecurity. So just to touch on what Tom had already mentioned, let's talk about the history of fraud and financial crime and, cyber and protection of data. So this all began pretty much with the banking industry, right? So banks went through the checking and savings accounts, paper transactions, people taking over those accounts. And when they took over those accounts, they were getting something of, $500 in Tom Shola's checking account or $500 in Tom Shola's savings account. And they were doing it through paper transactions. Then they started to realize that, theft in the United States specifically, is punishable by imprisonment. So let's try and do things as distant as we can. So they started to look at credit card and debit card fraud. Putting skimming machines on devices, skimming and getting those debit card and credit card numbers. They take the device off, they go into their garage, they start manufacturing cards, and then they start to use it. So in a weekend, I can easily get $150,000 or $200,000 off of debit and credit card skimming. Now comes the onset of the banking industry putting controls in place for that. And when they did that, they put the controls in place with anti-skimming machines, but they also started to look at putting chip and pin in place. Chip and pin really was a diffuser of the fraudster being able to create those cards very easily and inexpensively in a garage over a weekend. Chip and pin really kind of precluded that whole process. So the fraudsters and the hackers had to determine where was the next way to get, money, financials. So they started to look at, home equity lines of credit. It was back to that paper process, back to that card process. So they started to, do the transactions with home equity lines of credit. So Tom Shola has $500 in his checking account, $500 in his savings account, but a $2.6 million home equity line of credit. So that's where the fraudsters started to put those efforts. When they did this, the banks then started to react, right? And they put all of the controls back in place that they had in checking and savings, debit and credit, and put it on home equities, not allowing people to transfer money out of their home equity, say, to a foreign bank. The next place that the fraudsters started to look at was retirement plan and investments. Where's the baby boomers' money being hidden? So they went to the retirement plans, they went to investments, and they started to go into financial services. Let me show you in the next slide. This is the Verizon data breach report. I pulled the information. Here's the data loss of financial and insurance industry specific to us, right? Loss of laptops, improper disposal of backup tapes, people who accidentally make an error and release something, broken business practices, and really unshredded documents and things like that are 30% of the errors. Everything else they kind of lump into this 25%, and it's just being negligent, basically. But as Tom mentioned earlier, look at the web applications. 45% has to do with hacking, viruses, malware, phishing. And to Tom's point, where CEOs of the companies are now being held accountable for this. It's no longer the contact center rep. It's no longer the analyst that's being, it's got to be that message from the top. So hacking, virus, malware, when they do the phishing attempts, it's spear phishing, it's looking and targeting at this and looking at this information that's here, it's email methods, it's deceptive, subject lines, it's forged sender addresses. It's manipulating the information in the email address to make it look like Tom Shola and the L is really a 1. It's not an L. So I've taken over the account. And everyone does this, so I want to be very clear. Everyone clicks the phishing link, folks. So please, if you do that, come forward, make sure that you're going forward and saying, hey, I clicked the phishing link, to make sure that someone can forensically, extricate anything that's out there. But 81% of this is really all about people. So we go back to the people and the process and technology. And really, most of this is just people errors. It's things where people have done something. It's not necessarily the technology. So the ransomware really is beginning where phishing, you click the phishing link, and then the ransom comes in, and then they ask you to pay that ransom. And then it's a business decision whether you pay the ransom to continue with your business. But in today's regulatory environment, you still have to go forward and you have to release the information to regulators, your customers, your clients, and let them know that their data was taken over. Let's talk about passwords. So all of this, when you look at it, is really focusing on the one thing that could actually break through everything, and it's accessing and gaining access to the password. The password is really the credential that you really want to make sure is covered, and then that you're using strong passwords. So cracking passwords, let's give you some statistics here. So the easiest method to get data, commit financial crime, and ensure that you're using different passwords. So various applications, never use the same password. We recommend with financial services, your banking, your credit cards, making sure that all of that's secured with a different password than you're using for social media. Facebook, LinkedIn, Match.com, some folks are using the same password for all. So if I crack it in one place that has, not as strong practices for security. So make sure that your passwords are not the same, because if a fraudster gets into one password, they can get into all of your accounts. So let me give you some statistics. So most applications are accepting, the NIST standard of an 8-character password to 64-character password. And while 64 is very difficult to remember, and unless you're using something like a phrase, I'll be home for Christmas, where the S's are dollar signs to put special characters in. It's very difficult to remember those long passwords. You can use the vaults, but let me give you an example. An 8-character password can be cracked in approximately 2 to 3 hours. A 9-character password can take up to 5 days to break. 10-character password can take 4 months. When you're using an 11-character password, 10 years. And if you do a 12-character, you're looking at 200 years plus, and that's the value of security. So think about those extra letters. They have not completed all the studies, but putting a special character in the middle of those passwords actually adds a lot of extra benefit for the duration where those passwords could be cracked. So front-end security. So let's look at various ways you can get into an account, right? The account authentication, we covered all the password and login credentials. Making sure that there's some type of email alert or notification through text or SMS on high-risk transactions. In the old days, high-risk transactions were typically financial transactions. Now, as the fraudsters are setting pace, those financial transactions are not just the high risk. They're setting the pace to say, I'm taking over your account. I'm going to change your phone number. I'm going to change your email address. I'm going to change your password. I'm going to change your physical address. So all of those notifications should be raised and let the user know and the client know that there's been a change in their account. The advanced analytics and monitoring patterns, we do this here at John Hancock and Manulife. We're looking for things that, if you recently did a financial transaction, but you actually contacted our contact center X period of time, we look for those types of smoke and see if there's fire. Cooling period. So if you're a new registrant, making sure that anyone who is new and registering on our sites, that there's a cooling period to any financial transaction. And then the mobile app, is the biometrics, which is with the iPhone. Some of the items I just wanted to cover on the right-hand side is, banking verification. We are using a third party, and that third party is able to verify in a pretty high percentage of banks whether Tom Shola's name and information is on a bank account that I'm transferring funds to. And again, since fraud and financial crime is so prevalent, financial institution to financial institution within reason, we're able to share information. So in some of those banking verification where we couldn't get it because it's a small credit union or it's a community bank and it's not a national bank, we're actually able to pick up the phone and talk from financial crime to financial crime and make sure that we can get that information. Knowledge-based authentication, I think you're going to start to see a lot of that phasing out as we put more biometrics in place in most companies. Those are the annoying questions that you get. 1976, what color gremlin did you have? And someone says, I don't even know what a gremlin is. So it was a car for the folks who are younger. So the fraudsters know most of those knowledge-based authentications. They're building a whole view of you when they do this, and they're able to answer pretty readily and quickly from the information that's been disclosed in other breaches. Phone printing and then the risk-based authentication. those are items that we do here at John Hancock. And let me give you a little background. The risk-based authentication is all through, looking at the device that's being used, making sure that the device that's logging into the website is a device that hasn't been stolen, the IP address is a valid IP address, the signature serial information is accurate. It also looks, and you're used to it now, but a few years ago when we started all this through the New York Department of Financial Services requirement in 2019 to send the multi-factor authentication and the code to you, everyone was a little bit concerned at why am I getting this code? So this then sends the code the first time you log in to your phone or to your email. And then if you use a different device, so you go from an iPhone to an Android, it's going to then ask to authenticate that Android or the second device. There's other proprietary rules that have been built in, whether there's a geolocation change, whether the IP address is suspect. So they can actually push you to say, I'm not going to let you into the website, and I'm going to drive you to the contact center where, in our case, phone printing takes over. So it's not voice activation, it's not voice recognition. It's literally phone printing is printing, just like your thumbprint, a uniqueness to your voice. So it's looking at things, and we tried just, initially at John Hancock to do, password voice recognition to get people to log in. But there's avatars out there, you can Google them. You say about 20 or 30 sentences, and it pretty much will mirror your voice. You type into a text box, whatever you want to say, and it then just puts the sentences together, and it actually validates as a password. So we use phone printing, which is just really just looking at things like, lost packets of the call that human ear wouldn't pick up. Any background noise. A call coming from 416 looks like it's coming from Toronto, and in fact, it's coming from South Asia. Any of that information is gathered. It's over 1,000 proprietary items that it looks at, and then it determines in about 10 or 15 seconds whether it's a potential fraudster's call. If it is, in the United States, we don't have a national privacy law. And so we have to be bound by state laws. So what we decided to do here is we decided to not capture the good people's voices, because we would have to disclose that we're capturing it from a biometric perspective, but we capture and we store the bad people's voices. We store them in a library. And then when the fraudster calls back in, within about 5 to 10 seconds, we can then identify that it is a fraudster's voice. Fraudsters don't have privacy rights in the United States, so we don't have to disclose that we're storing their information, nor do we have to disclose that we've recorded their voice. Here's some information on infrastructure. So the infrastructure, physical security, making sure that, we're following Department of Defense security. We put everything in the cloud where there's a no-fly zone over the locations. Visitors can't just go to the cloud and drive to the cloud. Everything has to be, escorted. As far as data integrity, we have triple replication within a region. That's very important. The replication, to remote regions with another triple replication as well. Encryption of all the data, making sure that data at rest and in transit is encrypted, layered firewalls for extra protection, and then all of our logging and monitoring. And what logging and monitoring is, and it's really a new kind of concept, logging to know where people have gone, but also to have rules put in place so that when the logs are gathered, we can actually determine whether we think that they're suspect or an issue with someone within the networks. The platform resiliency is really to help us maintain, that customer, the expected customer experience. Highly elastic, making sure that our disaster recovery sites are over 1,000 miles apart, being able to keep our critical systems that can recover within minutes, and then making sure that we've patched everything as far as any kind of state of security. Physical security and the platform resiliency were very important during the COVID issue that we went through. What I want to kind of cover here is all of this is really great, right? Having all the security and infrastructure. But what it really does is it allows us here to have certifications. The SOC 1 and the SOC 2 are very important as far as what the Department of Labor is asking for, what the regulators are asking for. They're asking for an independent review. And what the SOC 1 report is, it's really looking at addressing internal controls over any of our financial reporting. While the SOC 2 report is really addressing the service organization's controls. So making sure that all the controls within the operations and the movement of data is all secure. And then when we get into the ISO certification, that's really ensuring the privacy standard is met from a data protection perspective. Here's a Department of Labor and cybersecurity practice. So we have a bulletin that went out and where we identified in each case how we align to the cybersecurity best practices. So on April 14th, and I think Tom had mentioned this, on April 14th, the U.S. Department of Labor, came up with an Employee Benefit and Security Administration. They announced the new cybersecurity guidance. So they weighed in and said for plan sponsors and plan record keepers and plan clients, it marks really the first time that the Department of Labor issued any guidance relating to cybersecurity. And there were three parts of the guidance. So the three parts are, number one, it was tips for hiring a service provider with strong cybersecurity practices. Second, it was the cybersecurity program best practices. And this was really part of the guidance, which is directed at plan record keepers. It's making sure that the record keepers and other service providers are responsible for securely maintaining plan and client data. And it's related to the IT systems. It provides an outline of the components and the comprehensiveness and effectiveness of the security program within the company. And then lastly, it was online tips and cybersecurity. So it's really a list of basic online security rules directed at plans. John Hancock retirement, we created a document to assist plan sponsors, advisors, trustees, to make sure that they understand, policies and procedures and practices and guidelines. And one item here, as far as online safety, I really highly recommend people go on to FBI.gov. They have a great cybersecurity tab. And if you have school-age children, it teaches them online safety through a series of games, taking children through, first grade all the way up to like 6th or 8th grade. But it's a great resource. And if you've ever had any identity theft, through either COVID, it was high with, unemployment filings, false unemployment filings, and also with the IRS tax filings. It lists a really great laundry list of items to cover and make sure that you don't forget to notify people. Spark. So Spark is the Society of Professional Asset Managers and Record Keepers. And I'm on the Data Security Oversight Board. So it's a group, and it's a group of very organizational record keepers and financial service companies. And what they're doing is they're looking at providing a common criteria for certain things like defining breach, defining fraud, making sure that we have, the government accountability for any of the offices. Standards, making sure that the standards and evaluating security technology. They went through a very good review with this whole team and the Oversight Board over the last couple of months on the Department of Labor to make sure we were all in line together. So really why the Data Security Oversight Board was created, it was really there to address cyber concerns. So they define really all the best practices. They share all the relevant ways to protect data and systems amongst the record keepers. And it recognizes that any attack on a member creates really the reputational damage for the whole industry. So we're, one team, one goal, and less competition when we're on this oversight board. One of the areas that was key to focus within Spark was really the standard definitions of security and cyber, just basically making sure that you all have an even playing field when you're evaluating a record keeper. That's all I have. Elke, I'll turn this over to you. See if there's any questions.